Hey everybody, welcome back to Football Talk with Vinny. In today's video, it's going to be essentially part 2 of the 8-part series where we just go over division by division teams and what their offseason needs are going to be, how much cap space are they going to have, and what I think they're going to do in free agency, or at least the options that they have. So as you can tell by the title of today's video, today we're going to be doing the NFC North, which is the Green Bay Packers, Chicago Bears, Detroit Lions, and the Minnesota Vikings. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with the Green Bay Packers, obviously fresh off the NFC Championship game. Obviously the game didn't go the way they wanted it to go, but again, you've now 2 consecutive years where you've made the NFC Championship game. So you do have a very good roster. You are going to lose a bunch of players, guys like Aaron Jones, Desmond King, right? There are a bunch of free agents that you might lose, and even Aaron Rodgers talked about it on some of his interviews that he had after the NFC Championship loss. But if you're Green Bay, as long as you keep Aaron Rodgers and a couple of the weapons, and you should be fine. But let's get into it in terms of offseason. They are actually $11 million over the cap. So again, they're going to have to probably restructure a deal or two just to get over the cap. The good news is though, they're not going to really have to cut or, release any of their players in order to get under the cap, because $11 million is manageable. Really just maybe go to a couple of players and restructure some deals, push some money back for a year or two. But with that being said, the fact that they are $11 million under, it's going to be very difficult to re-sign any of their free agents, and also any free agents in general, because they're going to have to restructure against some deals just to get to that, 0 or 1 million under the cap. But also you have your first round draft picks as well, which those guys are going to cost, I think, somewhere between, $3 to $6 or $7 million in cap space. I know Green Bay picks towards the back end, so it might be closer to that 3 million mark you have to pay towards a first round rookie. So again, they're going to have to free up $5, $6, $7 million just to sign all of their rookies, and just to still be under the cap at that point. So it's going to be very tough to sign a free agent. So I think where the Packers are at, it's kind of like just a run it back kind of scenario. Obviously, you're going to lose some players, and you hope some other guys can come in there and, maybe take that next step up, right? Because Aaron Jones is probably not going to be there. So you hope the next running back can come in and play as well or just as good. And also, this is kind of why we love football, right? Like, there's never a team that can be dominant for multiple years because free agency, right? You're always going to lose some players, right? Because you just don't have the cap space. Now, obviously this year's a little difficult because every team is losing like $20, $30 million in revenue, right? I think the cap last year was at like 210 or something. And now that it's dropping to 180, everyone's losing 30 million in cap space that they thought they were going to have. So I think it makes it a lot difficult this offseason than in years past for every single team. As far as the draft, at least you know one thing, they're not going to draft another quarterback. So at least now, if you're, the Green Bay Packers, maybe you look at drafting a defensive player, right? If you lose Desmond King, maybe you try to draft another corner, right? To offset the fact that you're going to lose a defensive player on that side of the ball. Obviously, if you're Aaron Rodgers, you'd love to maybe have a wide receiver at this point. But again, you were the #1 offense in the league last year. You do have good enough weapons. So I think if you're Green Bay, you'd probably want to lean on the defensive side of the ball, especially since the offense was not really the problem while you lost the NFC Championship game. It was really your defense. So I think if you're Green Bay, you would hope they would probably just address the defensive side of the ball. But you can also see the case for going offense as well. Next, we'll do the Chicago Bears. Obviously, the biggest, I think, decision for the Chicago Bears this offseason is Deshaun Watson. Do they try to go all in to trade for him, and what do they have to give up to get him? And is the package they offer even good enough for the Texans to want to accept? And I think if you bring in a guy like Deshaun Watson, literally the second you bring him in, you are Super Bowl contenders. You're probably in the top 5 of Super Bowl favorites, actually. When you have a defense that's that dominant, that literally single-handedly got them into the playoffs last year, right? Their offense was really bad, and they still made the playoffs. If you add a guy like Deshaun Watson, sure, you're going to lose Allen Robinson, but Deshaun Watson is the type of quarterback, he's the type of quarterback that can actually make the rest of your offense better, right? He makes your weapons better because he's such a good quarterback, right? Even though the guys maybe get a step of separation, that's enough for a guy like Deshaun Watson. So you don't need elite level receivers. Sure, he won't put up the numbers he put up in Houston, but he still will put up capable numbers to win ball games with that defense. Obviously, if you're not able to get Deshaun Watson, what do you do at the quarterback spot, right? Think Mitch Trubisky's a free agent. Nick Foles, do you go with him this season? Do you maybe draft a quarterback in the first round? You did make the playoffs, so you are picking towards the back end. If a guy like Mac Jones falls, do you take him and have him maybe sit behind Nick Foles for a year and then take the starting job? If you don't even decide to address the quarterback position, maybe with that first round pick, maybe you just try to replace the wide receiver position because you're going to lose Allen Robinson. So maybe you go wide receiver, maybe you go tight end, maybe you go offensive line. there actually could be a case for maybe drafting a defensive lineman. Some of your defensive players are starting to get a little older. Robert Quinn's in his 30s. I think Khalil Mack's 29 or 30, so he's getting there. So maybe you go defense as well. I kind of can see a route for both. But I think obviously if you're the Bears, the main goal is who or what do you do at the quarterback position? In terms of cap space, they have none. I think that right now they are right at 0. So essentially they're in a situation where they can't sign Allen Robinson. He's probably going to get north of 15, 16 million. So he's definitely going to be gone. And at this point, you probably don't have money to sign anybody else. You just have to sign your draft picks at this point. Next, we'll do the Minnesota Vikings. So the Minnesota Vikings are actually 10 million over the salary cap, and they have a couple big name free agents. The guy Anthony Harris, they franchise tagged him last year. He had a good season, right? And now he's a free agent. The Vikings are kind of in a similar position that pretty much most of the competitive teams are in, where because the salary cap is going down so drastically, they're pretty much strapped with salary cap space, and they're really gonna have to like restructure some deals just to get under the cap, and they really won't be able to sign anybody. So the offseason is gonna be pretty boring for them, right? It's gonna be essentially just drafting players, and then it just comes down to who should they target in the draft. I think if you're Minnesota, they have a pretty decent team on offense and defensive side. So I think they're in a good position where they can really just draft the best available player that falls to them, right? They have some talented wide receivers and obviously running back, right, on offense. Defense, they have a lot of young players that they brought in last year that played a little better towards the end of the season. So maybe you want to go defense. But again, if maybe a tight end falls to you in the first round, that's really good. Or maybe you dress that offensive line so you can maybe block a little better up front for both your running back and your quarterback. I think both kind of make sense to go either way. I guess just, again, best available. So the last one is going to be the Detroit Lions, and this one obviously is the most interesting as well in terms of what they can do this offseason because they have the most options, right? So I think really the number one thing they maybe should be thinking about at this point is, are they going to just, essentially tear it all down and just complete the full rebuild? I think obviously with the trade they made, I think they got worse at the quarterback position. I do think that Matt Stafford's a better quarterback than Jared Goff. And again, I think they only won 4 or 5 games with Matthew Stafford. So I think with Jared Goff, they're in for a longer season. Now, the good news is if they decide to go that route, I think they have some good players that they can trade, right? They can trade a guy like Flowers, who they did sign to a long-term deal about 2 years ago, right? Again, for them, for his number, it's 19 million in the cap. If they keep him, if they release him, it's 26 million, but if they trade him, it's 16. So again, he is still a good pass rusher. So every team can always use a pass rusher. So I think if you're a team out there and you can trade for a guy like Trey Flowers and you maybe only have to give up a 3rd or 4th round pick, if you're the Detroit Lions, you're really, again, only doing it to shed the salary cap space, right? Yes, you take 16 million in cap this year. Next year, he's not going to be on your roster, so you free up all that salary that you would have paid him next year, right? And again, if you are the Detroit Lions and that's the goal and you decide to just completely tear it down, then getting rid of a lot of your higher salary contract guys is what you should be doing, right? You need to be creating salary cap space and get whatever draft capital you can to trade some of those players that actually still have some trade value. And again, you did get 2 first-round picks from the Rams. If you can trade some of your older players and get some draft picks, doesn't matter what rounds they're in, you could start the rebuild process, and then next year, after that season's over, you should have a lot of cap space if you trade some of your older players this year to sign some guys next year, especially since the cap should go back up, right? There should be fans. You are going to, if you're the NFL, you're going to get a lot of ticket sales, so the salary cap should go up as well. Obviously, if you decide to do that, then maybe you don't bring back any of your wide receivers, right? You've got guys like Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones. They're both free agents, right? So if you decide to strip it down, you might not want to bring back either of those guys, right? Because they're, I think Marvin Jones, I want to say, is 30, 31. Kenny Golladay is 27, 28. So maybe you could bring back Kenny Golladay because he could still play good for the next 3 or 4 years. I think Marvin Jones just doesn't make any sense, right? If you're in a complete rebuild, you don't want a 31-year-old wide receiver because in 2 to 3 years, when you're ready to compete, I don't think that he's going to be playing at a level that you would even want him on your team at that point. And then obviously, now that you have Jared Goff, do you actually take a quarterback in the first round if one of those top 3-4 guys fall to you? Or do you just go forward with Jared Goff knowing you essentially have him for the next 2 years before you can get off his contract? So do you maybe look to just be really bad this year and maybe draft a quarterback in the first round next year, right? Because I think if you were to not re-sign your wide receivers, I think the Detroit Lions would be odds-on favorite to get the #1 pick in the draft next year. Now, again, in terms of salary cap space, because they didn't go over it, they're actually negative $8 million, so they're $8 million over the cap. So they're going to have to release some players or restructure some deals just to get over the cap. So they really can't even it's going to be difficult for them to even re-sign their own free agents, let alone bring in anybody if they decide not to completely tear it down. Which is why I think tearing it down is really the only option they have, right? If you're a team that won 4 or 5 games and you have no salary cap space and you just traded a better quarterback for a little bit of a downgrade, but a younger player, you know, you should be in a position where you're trying to just rebuild at this point. And I think that makes the most sense for Detroit. Okay, so that's going to be it for today's video. Obviously, I'll look forward to making some more videos on this series. Obviously, there's going to be 6 more divisions, so look out for those videos. And thank you guys so much for watching. Again, if you liked it, make sure to like the video and subscribe. It always helps me out in this channel. And thank you guys so much.